Well, hey there, terrible listeners. Let's not waste any time and get right back into it. The episode normally this week would be our fourth episode in our campaign, but we kind of wrapped up Star Trek Adventures last week, didn't we? And so we still have one more week to talk about this game, and I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to welcome back to the Terrible Warriors the person who wrote the game that we were just playing, Aaron Pollyea. Hello again.
Hi there. I guess I end up writing short adventures, don't I?
Well, you were part of the Living Campaign team, and we had you on. It was Tug of War, right?
Yes, Tug of War.
Yeah. So we had you on to talk about Tug of War, and now we are the stars that sing with our life. And it was both of these games ended up being, to I don't think no fault of your own, the more challenging adventures we were on. With Tug of War, listener, you might remember, it was more on the combat rules of the ship and having to navigate how to do that fairly. And then We Are the Stars was completely the opposite. It was much more on the situation we found ourselves in, and also Aaron, I was filling you in a little bit when we were chatting before we started. We were playing a mostly science crew, so there was a whole angle of the adventure that I allowed to sort of take place out of frame. So the captain was an NPC and the chief engineer was an NPC, and these things were out of the control of the players. So, so one of the reasons why our adventure ended up a little bit shorter.
There would have been more opportunity for command characters and whatnot to actually do some more in that.
Yeah, although, we still got to cut our teeth with an EVA and getting down and working on retrofitting the shuttles and things like that. They got to get there. But then as it got closer and closer to, all right, scientists, let us do the work now. And then they got kind of pushed into the lab as I went, well, the only thing we can do is try and solve this one mystery on why this is happening right now, as the whispering got louder and the voices started to come through, and then this somewhat anticlimactic moment where everyone is like, "Oh shit, this is it. We failed.
Yeah.
We're done." And I changed your story just a little bit where. They witnessed it, and the device that's in that star kind of pulled the worst of it away before it reached the ship, and that was dumb luck on their end, and but they got to see everything, but not really be able to revel in the victory because it wasn't an earned victory, right? It was.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have made it. They did make it. Don't pat yourself on the back, though.
Yeah, and that's great that you changed it for your group. I have no problems with that at all. Every group should actually have their own kind of. A game master shouldn't feel bad about changing things when it fits their group better. So.
Well, exactly. They're frameworks.
Yeah.
And exciting now going into the next story. I know we're returning to Narendra Station, and these hapless idiots who have no reason to feel proud about what they've done are now going to be assigned as like task force leads on the Shackleton mysteries, that they are now like, you are the experts and you have been at the front of everything that has happened. So you're in charge now, experts, and they don't know anything. Really, like they feel like children in this scale of what they've been up against. So it'll be a fun as we continue to twist the screws into them. Should you vote for us to return to that game, dear listener? Of course, we won't be doing that unless it'll come up in a poll again later, and you have to tell us we actually want to play it. So that was kind of a fun thing too. Aaron, how have you been, though? Catching you up on our story. I know you have been busy at work writing more adventures.
Yes, I have. I've actually been writing a couple standalone adventures that haven't been published yet. I've also been writing for some of the source books that will be coming out, like the Science Division core book, the other Quadrant books that haven't been released yet. There's all something in there for me. So I've been busy with Star Trek.
Yeah, it's exciting. I've got I have Operations in Command. Haven't really gotten into the text of the book so much as just been using it for the skills and the races that have been
Hmm.
added in, or the species rather. And so uh, that's kind of all I've had the time to chew into. But just
Yeah.
flipping through and seeing like, oh, all the histories that have been written in and new ships that have been added in, and
Hmm. Hmm.
there'll be a time maybe during the winter where I can get some mulled wine set aside and start flipping through the pages, listening to some Bach in the background or something like Picard.
Yeah, the starships were fun to write in Command Division. Um, I don't think I have any starships in science, but I wrote big chunks of science, the science division. So there'll be a lot of information in there.
Given the chunks of science that were in We Are the Stars, that doesn't catch me off guard at all. Um, Now, tell me a bit, coming back to the We Are the Stars campaign, because this is
Hmm.
kind
Hmm.
of, our bonus fourth episode on that. You had been warning me for months before we've been playing it, sending
Yeah.
me messages going, it's really weird. If you got any questions, it's really weird. I know this was one of your earlier adventures that you had written
Yes.
before you'd really written all the other ones that are in the other materials. What was it about We Are the Stars that had you so worried putting it out into the wild?
Well, it was the first adventure I had written once I had signed on as a freelancer with Modiphius. There's been things released before this that I wrote, but it was after this one. So this is like my first attempt at writing an adventure for Star Trek Adventures. And well, there's a couple things in there that might seem strange to a person that only comes at this adventure from a Star Trek perspective, and it might be strange from someone that comes at this with no knowledge of Star Trek and only from a real science background. And it all comes down to the third act. The third act is very strange, just because Starfleet and all the major spacefaring races in Star Trek have faster than light sensors of some sort or another. So in a lot of the episodes of Star Trek that you see on TV, or let's say Star Trek Generations, the movie, when a star explodes, you see it right away. You see the effects right away. You know it's coming.
Yeah, that's
Well,
that's a more of a movie TV
yes,
trope, right? Like you see that even in Star Wars Force Awakens, when Kylo Ren shoots the Starkiller base and blows up like 7 star systems, and they're just looking up in the sky, watching it all happen in
yes,
real time. But it's not real time because that would take hundreds or thousands or millions of years, depending on the distances. And even just in our solar system, it's
yeah.
about a half hour just to get to Mars at the speed of
Hmm.
light. And if Earth were to explode, you wouldn't know for almost an hour if you were sitting on Mars. The
Yeah, depending on where it is in its orbit, I think Earth is 8.3 light minutes away from the sun, and then Mars is about 2 AUs, so double
Yeah,
that from the sun.
yeah,
But yeah,
but there's also that bit that if we have faster than light sensors and the sun explodes, we would have 8 minutes of there's nothing we can do. We're going to die
yes.
because we're stuck on Earth.
So a lot of the stuff I was writing in Act 3 is you know what happens when it happens. It's just that the wave of death is going to take a while to get to you. So you might think, okay, we're done. This is it. I'm just going to go into my room and pray for the last few seconds of my life. But wait a second, this planet I have written over 19 AUs away from its star. So that means it's going to be, 160 minutes before the shock front gets to you.
That's a whole
You have
episode.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have time to figure this out still. It can be, yeah, a supernova in the system that you're in is probably one of the worst things that can happen for a starship. But you have time to figure it out. And then there's real physics ways of actually getting out of this. So yeah, I
And I also
was
had in my mind, you didn't go, you kind of touched into it, and I just kind of, my imagination let me go a little further of those, that grid pattern when people are talking about Stephen Hawking's of that
yeah,
gravity well and like the
yeah,
bowling
space time.
ball on that,
Hmm.
and it's just because we've got this alien tech in the center of this star, you can kind of do anything you want, and
Yeah,
the effects of that even as the star is collapsing, though, it's like now you're going uphill and you're going and you're being drawn into the center of this draining bathtub, and you're
Yeah, exactly.
forcing your way not just against time, and well, I mean you are because that's what's happening, but
Hmm.
it's literally a race against time because time is pulling you into in space time into
Hmm.
this into the center of this system, and so the whole ship is screaming and groaning. But then also weird things are happening where you see it on Star Trek a couple times. Something gets smashed and then it's immediately repaired again, and it's sort of time isn't making any sense anymore.
Yeah,
And
cause doesn't normally precede, the effect of it.
and
Effect can happen first in
and
these
that's
kind of
how we were
cases.
able to crack the code on these crystals, was by literally cracking the crystals and watching them as they went back to a previous state in time, got them to get that harmonic resonance to be able to then hear what the telepaths were hearing. And so
Hmm.
in that one little lab, they were our ensign did his Wesley Crusher moment and actually played it on the speakers. And
Hmm.
just as the star was going down, those five people in that room heard everything. And you, like, the music is gone now, and it's just this dead dread as they're watching the star and hearing those words playing on the speakers, and then those recordings are going to continue with them to Narendra as the whole ship is going to get commandeered by Corps of Engineers and Temporal Command and everything else. As
Oh yeah,
that
absolutely.
that poor ship, it wasn't even our main ship. We've been flying
Yeah,
around on a galaxy. This was a one-off ship for this one adventure.
a little
So
Nova, right?
yeah, a little Nova class, so we get to just wreck it, and now it's being mothballed immediately as like a lab experiment because no ship has ever been this close to a supernova, because they shouldn't have made it beyond that wave of death, but
Hmm.
because the device activated and teleported everything away, um, they got away from it. And so there's effects on that ship that would have been beyond the point of no return, that are now they can study.
Yes, exactly. And
And
that would be a perfect way
it's
to
almost
segue
like
into
going
like,
to the other side of the event horizon on a black hole and then making it out. And you
yes.
shouldn't, but they did almost.
So the
And
Federation Science Council is now very
yeah,
interested.
and that whole ship is like top secret
Hmm.
because the Romulans want to know everything about that too.
It's
And
another Nova class that disappears from active service.
exactly. I kind of love
Yeah,
that little because it's like the third or fourth Nova class in so many months that has now either been destroyed or gone missing. So
I
it's
think I mentioned two others that.
yeah. Well, we know the
Yeah.
one shows up later in Voyager, but I kind of like that
Yes.
eventually the ship just they just stop building it because people don't want to serve on it because it's just cursed.
Yeah.
It's just like I don't want. It's like wearing a red shirt. I don't want it anymore. Can we give it to the other department?
Yeah. Please, just take it.
All right, all right.
Yeah.
Security's gonna be gold now.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a fun story, and it was an interesting challenge for me because we were playing with an all science team. We had the option to create some support characters and go there in that direction, but they kind of my players were really into the puzzle side, and they were like, no, let them handle it. They can do this. We want to solve this puzzle. So okay, then
Hmm.
we'll go there, and I'll just have everything kind of happen off camera. Because I one of the strengths I like with Star Trek Adventures is if everyone ends up playing a blue shirt, that doesn't mean you're not going to ever be in engineering or go on combat because you
Hmm.
have the ability to create those support characters. And we created a few, but they just didn't seem interested in leaving the science side. They were like, "Oh, this is too cool. Let's go into it," and they just nerded out. So like, "All right, great. Let's do some research and development roles." and
And I'll.
oh, by the way, engineering has failed.
No, and I admit that I write most of my adventures. I have to make sure to include command type stuff, and I tend to do some engineering, but a lot of it is science. And then I'll go into explaining some of the ideas that I'm trying to put across. I know I am guilty of that, but
And that's also then, you're just creating the recipe. The game
yeah.
master is the one who's actually having to cook the meal. And there's always there is the advice in the core book that for every problem you're proposing against your players, to have already in mind what a blue, red, and gold solution, so that if they get stuck and they aren't figuring out an answer themselves, you've got a way to talk your way through, a way to fight your way through, and a way to think your way through any
Hmm.
situation, and give them those avenues. That's harder to actually put into practice than it is to just say. I think it helps to physically draw those boxes on my paper and then fill in whatever I can come up with. Um,
Yeah.
but it's tough when, in this kind of situation, in this campaign, we're not up against a foe, right? We're up against the environment
Yes.
and a ticking clock that isn't exactly even reliable. And the it's not like a standoff with the Romulans or a collapsing cave or even tug of war where we just have to get away from the threat of these tractor beams.
Hmm.
This was because we were focusing on the science arc of the story. It was I already know the answers, but I want them to feel like they've earned it without me just telling them the story. Uh, and okay, spend a little more momentum and I'll give you another answer. Keep rolling the
Hmm.
dice. Okay, I can't tell you everything because you don't have, but I also don't want to ultimately withhold those. I do want them to hear it one way or the other,
Yes.
and so it just became uh, it's strange, I guess, looking back, pulling back the curtain. The stakes are um, they felt a little. They're more smoke and mirrors on my side because I'm going to tell them because I want to, but
Yes.
I have to wait until that moment where they have enough points to justify me rewarding them with a little more
Hmm.
information. And it was so much different from uh, a panther's attacking you, grab your knife, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not as straightforward as that.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways of going about figuring out what's happening or different avenues to explore with this. So, yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, it's very rewarding when you're able to figure out one of these problems. And yeah, if your players are able to do it, yeah, you want to give it to them. To see that kind of success on their faces. That's yeah, I get it.
Now, I know some people who are listening take this and then go and run their games themselves, either running the same campaign I've done it and remixing it for their players, or just picking up the game themselves. If
Hmm.
someone who's now listened to it and already knows how it ends, so they're probably going to be the game master now, and it wants to take We Are the Stars to their table, what advice, knowing that we can spoil everything on it now, would you
Okay.
give them um, going into this if they wanted to then take this story that they know everything about now and turn it over to their table and try and lead them through it? Um, Granted, they won't have the same makeup as ours and
Hmm.
the things I was threading because I keep going on these tangents, but this is what I
That's
do on a
fine.
Saturday morning. Is I loved that this was the one mission too where we're finally getting answers. All those little things that have been happening in the other episodes, strange anomalies, and oh, that's interesting, but
Hmm.
I don't have an answer for it. All of a sudden, it's like we're playing connect the dots for the first time,
Yes.
and it worked for us that it was such a smaller crew on a different ship because now they get to go back to Horizon and be we think we have a lead, and there's this excitement now going
Hmm.
into the next story.
And you
um
have the resources of a whole galaxy class
yeah,
behind you, and
yeah,
oh yeah.
and it's exciting, and now other people are like, I think they're onto something, and the brass is going to be putting together like a meeting with all the other ships that have been doing their own expeditions, be like, we need to start comparing notes because
Mm.
something much bigger is going on here, and we're going to put the Horizon people in charge because they happen to have the most notes.
Hmm.
And that it's just that's the only reason. and but We Are the Stars that Sing with Our Life is a different kind of adventure. What advice would you give a GM who's just listened to this our story and wants to, you know, download the PDF and play it with their players?
The advice I'd probably give is that if you have played through all the other adventures in order, basically order, you've been exposed to all these clues, like you said. Your crew has seen the clues slowly add up, but there hasn't been any kind of smoking gun or even, I don't know, no real fresh evidence. But this is the adventure that will give them fresh evidence, something that this is more than just little pieces of an ancient civilization that we keep finding, or weird clues about biologically compatible creatures that have maybe been gene engineered with a tug of war with the two species that
Yeah.
are there. This is a high energy event that takes place, a supernova, that the technology that was left behind seemingly just takes within its own stride. Even though it's hundreds of thousands or millions of years old, it's able to handle a supernova and effectively use its energy to do something. So, my advice would be to ensure that you try to get across to your players that the clues that they've been finding are these breadcrumbs that are leading up to a conclusion that you might understand what's happening, but you won't ever understand the full picture just because whatever is happening is beyond the human experience, quote unquote. That this civilization has clearly progressed beyond what we understand. And we're kind of the ants at the roadside picnic, to quote a Soviet-era author, a sci-fi author. Great book, by the way. I recommend it. But the idea behind it was that if we were ants and a family on a road trip just stopped on the side of the road and had a picnic, would we understand what they were doing? Would we understand what they left behind, the garbage that they left behind, perhaps the spilled Coca-Cola or whatever, the oil from the car that might have dripped onto the ground? We just don't understand it. We might have a very firm grasp of our own lives, our own technology, but this is beyond. And that kind of awe, it's hard to get across sometimes. I probably would have a difficult time doing that myself, but yeah, just trying to communicate that to your players.
In the last episode last week, after everything had happened and the ship had reconnected with the McGowie and was like, oh my god, I can't believe we made it out of that. There was the civilian archaeologist who was in the lab with them and had been assisting them with the crystals. He was the one walking down the hallway with them going, it's almost too bad that we weren't teleported with the rest of the system or taken with everything else. Could you imagine what we could have learned and seen on the other side? And there was this moment with the other scientists, like the players. I was especially saying that to horrify them, where they're like, oh no, there's no point in going, like, and I was playing it off like TNG episodes where no one has gone before. The first episode with the Traveler. And there's that one player, the one character who comes on board. I can't remember his name now, the insufferable one in the yellow shirt, who's he's all about like, this is wonderful, this is great, we've gone to another galaxy, and Picard has to kind of slap him, going like, it doesn't matter what we learn out here if we die out here.
Exactly.
But playing off that naive idea of like, and he is excited almost because he doesn't grasp the threat that this scale of technology and power could represent.
I would actually expect most scientists that were exposed to this to be excited at just being completely dumbfounded by something.
Yeah.
Something that is so beyond what everyone understands. Yeah, that's excitement, but excitement that you're describing, no. That's kind of
but it's an excitement like a fear of God excitement. Like there's a terror that's reserved to be like, we have to learn about this because this is awesome in the terrifying sense.
Exactly.
Which is exciting.
Agreed.
Too. Yeah. Looking ahead, I was just having a look here at the current standings of our Patreon poll. Sadly, it does not look like we will return to Star Trek Adventures next month. The other options I had were Urban Shadows, Dogs in the Vineyard, and Night Witches. And
I know what I would pick.
Right,
Nice.
I thought you might. Dogs in the Vineyard is currently in the lead, but only by 2 votes. Night Witches is in second. So,
Night Witches.
So here we go. Here's a little
right.
time for you to platform. Night Witches is written by Jason Morningstar, I believe, and it focuses on a group of women who served in the
Yes.
Russian Air Force
So Soviet Air
in or
Force.
Soviet Air Force in World War II.
Yes.
And that's all I really know about the game right now. I begin researching it next week after we're done recording the December game, which is I'm actually recording it tomorrow. But at the time you're listening to this episode, I recorded it 3 days ago. But we're playing Masks next.
Okay.
As soon as we're done with Masks, I then turn the page and get ready for the next game. So I'm gonna have to. I've already done Dogs in the Vineyard, so I'm going to look ahead and research Night Witches anyways. But Aaron, you have some connection with the Night Witches and its history. You know a bit about them.
I
Um,
do know a bit about them. Yeah,
so
even though I
tell me
didn't
about
work
your
on the
other
game.
life. You write for Star Trek by day or by night,
Yes.
and by day or by night you're you have other role playing.
Well, I have other role playing that I do, yeah. But I have, as a hobby, I do World War II reenacting, and specifically, I do Soviet reenacting, along with my wife. So, one of the things that most people don't know about the Soviets in World War II is that they had many, many, many women serve in frontline combat roles just right alongside the men. But the Night Witches, as the Germans called them, they didn't refer to themselves as the Night Witches at the time, were originally one of three Air Force regiments that were entirely women, that were formed in late 41, early 42. The Night Witches specifically, see, I can get into a lot of detail about this, but they were specifically the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. They were later renamed the 46th Guard Bomber Regiment. Fully female from their officers all the way down to their mechanics. They were a fascinating group. I always refer to them as big damn heroes. They often flew dozens of missions each every night, harassing the Germans as they slept, and they fought using World War I era biplanes, which most people think would be complete garbage at the time because
Completely
Messerschmitts.
obsolete and not fly worthy at all.
Well, they were obsolete. Let's not say they weren't, but they were used very effectively because they were used at night. They were hard to detect. They would go up to altitude, and if you know anything about aerodynamics, biplanes generally have a really good glide ratio. Well, I mean, in general, I'm overly generalizing there, but they would shut off their engines and glide over the German lines silently. So that's where the Germans gave them their nickname, because when their planes flew over at treetop level, they sounded like a broom sweeping across the ground. That's how their wings sounded going through. But they'd come over
Right,
silently and
because
then drop
the
bombs.
biplanes would the wings would be covered in fabric and
Yes.
stuff like that too. They weren't just wooden, so they would have
Hmm.
all that flapping material.
Yes,
Oh, that's
it
pretty
was. I
cool.
mean, it was tightly put
Yeah,
onto the frame. But these night witches would drop bombs on the Germans as they slept, and then they would turn their engines back on and fly away. But they did this all the way through some of the worst winters the 20th century saw. Going up to altitude without oxygen, up to 10,000 feet. You don't need oxygen there, but think about how cold it would be when the ground temperature is
oh
40
yeah,
below
a lot of these
zero.
were open cockpits.
Oh, they all
They,
were
they
open
all they all
cockpit.
would have been, yeah.
So the role playing game specifically is about this regiment and the things that they go through, because it's not just about fighting Germans. It's about fighting sexism as well, because even though the Soviet Union did kind of have egalitarianism in many ways, there was still a lot of sexism in the Soviet army. So men didn't think that women should be up on the front line. Some men did. Um, I talk about that a lot when I'm at an event talking to the public, when I'm in my character. But yeah, they have to struggle against that. They have to struggle against how to be feminine as well as be a soldier. A lot of them had kind of identity issues because of that. Like, should I try to portray myself as being strong, as a strong soldier, or should I portray myself as being a woman? So some of them would shave their heads, some of them would keep their hair long, some of them would embroider their uniforms and get in trouble for it. Yeah, they're a very interesting group. Anyway, my wife actually does reenacting alongside me, and she actually portrays one of the Night Witches.
I have seen some of the pictures that you have shared on social media, and it's really interesting. Reenactment is not something I've ever known anyone who's done, and it's also interesting to meet someone who does reenactment that also has another foot in role playing and tabletop role playing. And I mean, they all kind of feel like they're connected by a similar passion of telling stories
Yeah.
and that. But what would be like what makes a reenactment versus something more like a live action role playing?
Well, in a reenactment in general, well, live action role playing, you don't have firearms that actually will fire blanks. You'll have Nerf guns or Nerf
Yeah.
swords, foam swords, but in a reenactment, it's more about living the life and then teaching the history, trying to be as accurate as possible. Um,
So
so you want
education is the driving force.
education is key because a lot of times, even if you think you know a lot about World War II or World War One or whatever war is being reenacted, you generally don't know a lot. And I'll say that as a person that does this reenacting, I know nothing. Okay, I know more than most people do, but I know so little to what's compared to what's out there. So even I will take it as an educational experience. Everything I do there is so I can understand things better, and then maybe through me understanding things, other people can.
So you're
And
taking the additive of walk a day in the shoes, literally,
yes,
and walking the shoes and eating and sleeping and talking the talk.
yes,
Uh,
and it's specifically the reason why my wife and I both decided to start doing it is that we go to air shows, we go to historical events around the U.S. and even in Canada. We've been to the Ontario museum up there. Now I'm blanking on the name. It's the Ontario Tank Museum. It's
mhm.
anyway. We've been up
It's
there,
up
but a lot
there.
of
I don't actually know it
yeah,
myself either.
it we go to these events and we often have people talking about the allies of World War II. And they'll talk about the Canadians, the UK, Australians, U.S., New Zealand, but they'll always forget the Soviets. And we kept hearing this over and over and over again. And we said, we can't have that anymore. We need to start talking about this. We need to make sure that people don't forget the fact that the Soviets lost millions upon millions of people in the war, that most of the fighting actually occurred on the Eastern Front.
It's interesting. I think the Soviets got retconned in history because of Stalin and then the Cold War and then
Yes.
American push against communism and then everything kind of it revised history that they like ally with an asterisk beside their name.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but that doesn't like erase what happened and why those things happened when they did. If things went differently with you know the way their leadership was, and then into the 50s and post-war with Berlin and Korea and the rest as the world was kind of cut in half.
Hmm.
But it's colored then everything that happened before that as well, even going back to before World War II.
Yes.
It's interesting the effect that those biases would have, and then revising history looking backwards.
And the Soviet experience during the war colored their own perspective of the West and how to deal with the United States and its allies after the war. It really did color it. When you have an event as destructive as World War II happen, to give an example, is one of the facts that I try to put out there, and I'm using round numbers here. The United States, and I'm sorry that I don't know about Canada, but the United States lost about 400,000 people during the war across all theaters of combat. The Soviets lost a minimum of 20 million. And it ends up, when you start adding in the Holocaust and all of that, that the Soviets lost about 1 out of 7 people. 1 out of 7 people in their entire nation was killed in the war. And you can't come out of that without being changed somehow. You can't. And to to understand that and the horrors that they saw, and yeah, just the loss of an entire generation. It really does kind of change your perspective on World War II, on history, on the Cold War, on the diplomacy of today. It's interesting, and it's worth teaching and learning about. But yeah, Night Witches is very important. It's a well written game, and it explores some pretty serious subject matter, such as sexism and
Hmm.
some of the terrible things that these women saw in the war.
Yeah, it's I am excited to return to Dogs in the Vineyard. It's got its own thing going for it, but Night Witches has been there in my shelf for a while, and I if it doesn't make it this poll, it will show up again, and I'll just keep putting it there until you have no choice. You must pick something you haven't picked. Here's a poll of all the others coming back, and one day we're definitely gonna be playing Night Witches and playing through it. The I was just getting very like I just want to sit down and talk about history now and the reenactments and stuff. The uh, you're still writing new Star Trek, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So
yes.
uh, I guess as we wrap up this lovely conversation you have shared with me,
Hmm.
what would you like to tease us with of things that we haven't played yet on our living campaign, or even stuff that isn't that is just ready to maybe see the light of day that we can bring to our tables?
Well, I would say that there's some standalone adventures out there that I have written that, when they get published, if you have enjoyed Tug of War and We Are the Stars, that there's something that I wrote that's called Nest in the Dark. And I don't want to talk much more about it without spoiling a whole bunch, but it deals with some pretty heavy cerebral subjects, let's put it that way. But there's a lot of ways to go about exploring the ideas in that mission. But yeah, Nest in the Dark
So
is.
continuing to feel like we're ants on the highway.
Yes, exactly. But there's episodes of Next Gen that are like that. There's episodes of the original series that are like that, where mankind hits something that they have never experienced before.
That very
And
first episode with the Borg,
yeah,
before the Borg became what they were, that first time they interacted with them, and they were just so alien and unstoppable. Um, but then
relics,
relics, or the stuff with the Tikhon Empire, or the
hmm
Iconian gateways,
the
um,
Iconian gateways.
right?
But yeah, I'll say relics, hint, hint,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's
Oh,
about it.
relics was the one with the precursor race, the one where
Hmm.
what was the one where they were racing against the other species to find the clues in their DNA.
That's oh boy. Now I know what one you're talking
Yeah,
about,
and
but
there
relics was not that one.
and then there ended up being like a single race that had seeded the galaxy
Yes,
that had
precursors. Yeah,
and so Cardassians, Klingons, Romulans, humans were all shared a common ancestry with these first ones who, when they went out into space, they were alone, and
yeah, and they seeded DNA onto planets so that it would be more likely humanoids would evolve.
yeah, and it was like a little tongue in cheek on like, why do all the Star Trek aliens look like humans with prosthetics? I was like, well, that's how now it's canon. Deal with
Yeah,
it.
it's canon, and it wasn't a bad episode. It's
it was
it's an interesting
it was an
idea.
interesting episode, and it was a kind of a fun like chasing the breadcrumbs, almost a who done it, right? Where they're getting all these pieces together. What one was Relic? Um,
Relics, relics is the one with Scotty.
oh, the Dyson sphere.
Yeah,
Oh,
hint hint. That's it.
interesting. I
I
know.
don't want to spoil any further than that.
Okay. The I did like in the core book they have a section on big places of note, and the Dyson sphere and the crystalline entity, they all get mentioned,
Hmm.
and not just what they were on the show, but then what's happened to them since.
Yes.
And it was kind of fun to see, oh yeah, the Dyson Sphere is still there, and the Corps of Engineers is still studying it, and they don't really know what's inside, and no one can really get close to it, but it's there if you want to go visit it in your game.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to miss being as big as it is, right?
Yeah, being a whole big Dyson Sphere, and like the crystalline entity, depending on where you are in the timeline, is still just roaming around and doing its thing. It hasn't been shattered yet, but just because that one doesn't mean it was one of a kind. And so there's all those other kinds of things. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for writing these games and for giving us a chance to go through it and play in your sandbox. So. This was a fun story, and it was fun to get a little bit of a sense of that they're all connected and shared, and that there is something going on, even if we'll never understand what it is. There's this tangible thread now that we're like, oh, and then that's just gonna keep bringing us back. Now it's like we've got to find out more. We need to know what's going on.
Well, with the further adventures in this season of Star Trek Adventures, you should be able to have your characters figure out what's going on.
Tilakal.
I have not written any further ones in this season. Those are out of my hands, but there will be better clues later, or more clues, I should say.
Very, very exciting. So I implore you, listener, I know Aaron wants you to vote for Night Witches, and so do I, but also for Star Trek Adventures. Let's just get a tie and play both of them. If you're interested in hearing more about those polls, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/terriblewarriors. Every month, there's a new poll put up. Anyone who supports at any amount gets access to that poll. There's other things, the debriefs, the postcards and stuff that are at the higher levels. But if you want to just help us choose which game we play next, that's where you should go and do that. Because we get requests all the time on social media and emails and in our Discord channel, and I love it and I appreciate it and I like getting stuff put on my radar, but I don't listen to them. I listen to the poll on Patreon. So go check that one out. And in the meantime, Aaron, where can we find you? Where's your presence online?
I'm on Facebook, Aaron Pollyea, Pollya. I'm the only one there. That's where I am. You can contact me there. I post writing stuff there now and then. But yeah, that's where I am. You can see pictures of reenacting
and some really cool pictures of reenactment. It's been a really interesting keyhole to pee through into the into that that hobby and that world of really interesting details. It's your uniforms and all that kind of stuff. It's great. It's really cool.
Thanks.
And as well as there we go. Follow us on Twitter at Dice Warriors. Hear out what we're doing next week. We start the first episode of Masks, also voted for you, a New Generation. It's the third supplement book just came out, Unbound. So we are going to be playing, even though it's their third turn on Masks, with old and new expansion material, all the new heroes that are available to play as. And this will be a very different tone than those first two games were. I'm very excited to play that. I'm actually recording it tomorrow at the time of this recording, so I don't know what it's going to be like. So find out. It's going to be exciting. And it's gonna be a good month of December as we wrap up 2018 and then find out which game we're gonna be playing in the new year. And I hope it's Night Witches, because then I'll set it at that same time of year, right in the middle of winter, right at the turn of the new year, at those times of like the pause that sometimes happens during Christmas and around that very quiet and horrific time of the war. It will be an interesting place to set it. So we'll see. Although we might end up playing Dogs in the Vineyard, which works too because of Red Dead Redemption 2, and I just feel like being a cowboy too. So it's all. I don't put any of those games onto that poll if I'm not 100% excited about all of them. So it's always a win for me, no matter what you choose. So it's I can continue on, but I digress. I have expended my time with you and with myself. Thank you for joining me, Aaron. And
thank you for having me. I love talking Star Trek Adventures.
And I love talking Star Trek Adventures as well. I cannot wait to see what happens next. Until next time, dear listeners, thank you for joining us. Be good to each other.